before Nathan Drake and Lara Croft, we had Indiana Jones. I've been kind of stuck in a rut for the last couple weeks. In fact, the last month or so. Still not a whole lot of stuff coming out in theaters as far as new releases that I'm interested in. I do have a list of videos that I'd like to put out for this year and the following years. But I did reach a bit of a dry spell, and I thought, what am I going to talk about? February has been meh as far as me talking about movies, but it just so happened last week I was watching a scene on YouTube from one of the Indiana Jones films. I did consider reviewing them at one point, but then I thought, other people have said it. What could I bring to the table? But then the more I let it soak in, it started to hit me like a bolt of lightning. And then I put out on my Facebook page, would you guys like to see me talk about Indiana Jones? My God, you guys were salivating at the possibility. So here we are, starting with the famous Raiders of the Lost Ark, directed by Steven Spielberg, produced by George Lucas, starring Harrison Ford, Paul Freeman, Karen Allen, among many others. This film came out in 1981, 40 years ago this June. To say that it's one of the greatest action films, if not one of the greatest movies of all time, that's a bit of an understatement. It may not be my personal favorite. We'll cover that in the Last Crusade review. That was the one that I was first introduced to with Indiana Jones. Watching it just a couple hours ago, I have to say that it riveted me so much. All the stuff that I could say has been said, but I'm gonna do it anyway because this movie is really one that anyone who's interested in film has to try out. The brainchild of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, who are two good friends in real life, set out to make a movie for fun, as George Lucas said in an interview in 1981. And my God, did we get that and then some. There's so many things about Raiders of the Lost Ark that are iconic, from the opening scene with the boulder, the truck chase, the musical score by John Williams, one of the greatest achievements in cinema history. The character of Indiana Jones has meant a great deal to me throughout most of my life. This character is one of my all-time favorites, and these movies, if you haven't seen these, give them a watch. They are so worth your time. The idea of a college professor having a huge interest in archaeology, showcasing us the history of these objects that he's interested in finding, with a group of adversaries also vying for the same artifact he's hunting, the clashing of ideologies of why they want the certain object versus why Indiana Jones wants to find the object. Just like in Lara Croft and in the Uncharted series, to me that idea is just exciting. And this at the time in 1981 was an attempt to modernize the adventure serials that were seen during the 1930s and 40s. I think it's safe to argue that this is Harrison Ford's signature role. You could talk about Richard Kimball in The Fugitive, the President in Air Force One, Jack Ryan in Clear and Present Danger, John Book in Witness, and yes, even Han Solo in Star Wars. But in reality, in my book, he is always going to be Indiana Jones. And the way that this movie introduces the character is so cool and so simplistic and so effective. Just like in the original Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire in one specific way. This movie does not waste a single moment on introducing these characters and showing us what exactly they're all about. It opens in South America in 1936, where this man in a fedora and a brown leather jacket with these two other guys, one of them played by Alfred Molina, and one of them decides to betray Indiana Jones, takes the whip, knocks it right out of his hand, and then he comes out of the shadows into the light with the John Williams music going da, 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 showing that our protagonist has a bit of an edge to him, that he's not exactly the most well-rounded good guy in the room. Then we get to the famous scene where he removes the idol from the stand with the bag of sand, which that alone, every time I watch it, it literally makes me tense up. And then Alfred Molina betrays him, and Indy manages to barely get away, and the famous boulder scene happens, barreling down towards Indiana Jones. This opening shows you that not only is Indiana Jones on top of his game, he's just a normal guy in the middle of this crazy situation. Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote the screenplay for this, and also the screenwriter for various Star Wars projects, did a fantastic job of summing up what this character's all about. Someone who's very interested in archaeology, but not just for self-gratification. He does it to help to keep the museum afloat that he's working at and also teaching archaeology at. Then in the following scene, we get introduced to the main MacGuffin that's used in the movie, the Ark of the Covenant. Again, just like in the opening scene, it's all the important information you need to know about, and there's a sense of urgency underneath the surface, that it contains the power of God, basically. And these Army intelligence officers that tell Indiana Jones this information, one of them is actually the same actor who was Red Six in the original Star Wars. They feel like real people too. They interrupt each other, and Indiana Jones is a little bit put off by that, considering how self-important they come off as, or at least the one guy. And then we also have Marcus Brody, played by Denholm Elliott in the movie, who doesn't really have a whole lot to do in this one. And that's mostly because, having seen Last Crusade first and seeing how he is in that movie, it's kind of disappointing knowing what he was really capable of as an actor and as a character. But he is nice to have around. And he's also very knowledgeable, just like Indiana Jones is. But the first 20 minutes or so of the movie show some really good humorous moments, moments, like the girl with the love you message over her eyelids, and Indy's a little bit put off by that. Clearly that girl was in love with him, and a lot of that is because Harrison Ford's a good-looking guy. But the thing is, he's oblivious to it, hence why he reacts the way he does. And then when he's describing the Ark of the Covenant to these two Army intelligence officers, and they look pretty clueless, and he goes,
You guys ever go to Sunday school?
Well,
Oh, look.
But it also shows you that he's not really interested in the implications of the supernatural, especially when Marcus says to him, Indy, I don't know if you should do this. This is bigger than any other artifact you've gone after. Oh, come on, Marcus, you sound like my mother. I don't believe in this superstitious hocus pocus. But then he ends up going to look for it anyway, because a former mentor of his, Abner Ravenwood, has the one specific item that the Nazis need in order to find the location of the Ark of the Covenant. And there's only one person who would know where he is. Abner's daughter, Marion Ravenwood, played by Karen Allen. And as far as female characters go, Marion is my favorite in the Indiana Jones series. Marion is very capable and is not some pathetic damsel in distress, even though she does kind of fall into those traps a little bit later on in the movie. But she's more than capable of taking care of herself. She's not completely helpless. And she's more than capable of holding her liquor against the one guy that challenges her in the bar. So then when she's reunited with Indiana, you can feel the history between these two characters. How she was young and naive, even though he didn't really feel the same way. And on top of that, she just punches him right out the gate when he shows up. She does not give a crap whatsoever. And then later on, the Nazis and their henchmen showed up, led by Herr Todt. Good evening, Fräulein. Look, Mac, we're closed. Wir not thirsty, Fräulein Ravenwood. But before they can interrogate her to find the artifact that she has, Indy comes in and rescues her from the Nazis, and then Todt finds the artifact, which was covered in fire, grabs it, and then therefore burns his hand, just like Joe Pesci in Home Alone. That scream that he has shows you just how much of a pathetic weasel he is. Then they later travel to Cairo, where the Nazis are digging for the Ark of the Covenant, and they meet Sala, played by John Rhys-Davies. Hopefully I said that right. Some of you might know him as Gimli from Lord of the Rings, and Sala is a great side character. He's a very resourceful ally for Indy, especially in this one. He's very much aware of the history of the Ark of the Covenant and all the various artifacts that Indy ends up looking for in Last Crusade, and John Rhys-Davies is absolutely fantastic. I am the monarch of the sea. I am the leader of... bad dates. Which, by the way, that scene when they realize that the Nazis are digging in the wrong spot, Indy's got the poisoned dates in his hand and he's just bouncing it around. Again, another perfect way of explaining information to the audience. Putting it in a location or have something going on that's interesting. But then we also get the sequence where Indy and Marion are ambushed by the Nazis' cohorts, and Indy faces off against that swordsman in the middle of the street, and instead of fighting him, he just pulls out his gun and shoots him dead. For those of you who don't know, a lot of that was because people on the set were getting sick from food poisoning, and apparently Harrison Ford caught some food poisoning, and instead of trying to fight him, he just improvised right on the spot and told Spielberg before they shot it, "Can I just shoot him instead?" And Spielberg said, "Yes, go ahead, great idea." Things like that weren't exactly planned, but yet it made it so worthwhile, and had they done it any other way, it wouldn't have been as good. And if you ask me, it all paid off in spades. Then Indy believes that Marion is dead after an explosion that happens, and it's another way of humanizing the character because it's someone that he actually does care about, but he's not really quick to say it at first, and he feels responsible for her death. But then he's summoned by the one guy that he does not want to deal with, his rival, Belloc, played excellently by Paul Freeman. He's a French businessman who's in cahoots with the Nazis to try to find the Ark of the Covenant. Do you realize what the Ark is, Indy? It is a radio beacon, a transmitter for speaking to God. You want to go talk to God? Let's go together. I got nothing better to do. Harrison Ford's acting in this movie and the way he delivers his lines, he could not have done it any better, and there's no other actor you could have chosen other than him. Then later on, they go to the digging site where they're looking for the Ark. Indy manages to find the Ark's location where the sun manages to shine through the ceiling at just a certain time of the day, holding up the staff, and he manages to find the Ark's location, and John Williams' music in that scene. Oh my God, it is gorgeous for the ears. And not to mention the sound design, which was done by Ben Burtt, who also did the sound design for Star Wars. The punching sound effects that we hear in the Indiana Jones movies, and we actually hear a little bit of that in Force Awakens as well, was apparently someone using a baseball bat, slamming it onto a pile of leather jackets. And another great image that we get is people right against the sunset digging for the Ark. And then you get that sense that they are looking for something truly biblical, with a thunderstorm brewing in the background, clearly against the backdrop. I mean, this is 1981, let's be obvious, but even then, it's still a great scene. And then they finally break a hole in the ground. He throws the torch down to the ground and discover all the snakes covering the floor. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? Asps. Very dangerous. You go first. And just to go back to the opening scene when Indy gets in that plane by his friend and that snake is laying on his lap, another example of humanizing Indy, showing that he really is just a person. I hate snakes! I hate them! And I realized this as I was watching the movie, that the movie really doesn't lose momentum that much, except for this part when they finally get inside the temple where the Ark is. When it cuts back from Indy to Marion with Belloc, it kind of loses steam just a little bit, but not terribly done. It is cut together fairly well. The movie does kind of slow down a little bit, and we'll get to it later, but it does kind of do the same thing towards the climax of the movie. They find Indy inside the Well of Souls, and they drop Marion in there to leave them be eaten by the snakes. Ha 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 ha! Son of a bitch. Indy and Marion manage to get out of the Well of Souls alive. Then we get a fight between Indy and a big guy played by Pat Roach, who appears in all 3 Indiana Jones movies. This scene, along with the truck sequence, is probably the pinnacle of action filmmaking. The timing of the shots, the cinematography by Douglas Slocum, and the musical score, once again by John Williams. This whole section of the film is fantastic. Just when Indy's about to hijack the plane, Pat Roach comes out challenging him to a fight, taking so many hits, throwing all the punches he can at this guy, only then for the guy to get sliced up by the propeller. Meanwhile, Marion is inside the tail of the cockpit firing a machine gun. One of the barrels explodes and the fire is just rolling right through the gas trail. Those things like that, I can't even imagine setting stuff up like that. That attention to detail by Spielberg. Yeah, I'm not a filmmaking expert necessarily, but those little things like that, you don't realize just how much work goes into that. If I was the director and I was asked, okay, let's create this sequence and let's also do the truck scene as well, I would have gone, where do I start with that? But you put it in the hands of Steven Spielberg.
Don't panic, I know what to do.
And then we get to the truck chase. How are you going to get it back, Indy? I don't know. I'm making this up as I go along. Riding in on a horse, getting right to the truck, jumping into the driver's cabin, pushing the one German out the window, getting kicked through the windshield, under the truck, dragged by the truck on the string, climbing back up on the string, back into the driver's cabinet. This whole sequence is absolutely thrilling. And this is where the movie, for me at least, kind of loses momentum. It almost kind of feels like the movie screeches to a halt in some ways. Now, I get it. We've had a lot of action going on in the last 20 minutes or so you do need some time to breathe. But therefore, we do get a really adorable and humorous scene where Indy got shot during his scuffle with that one Nazi in the truck, and Marion's trying to tend to him. Like, where doesn't it hurt? Here. Here. Here's not too bad either. But then the Nazis later raid the boat, they take the Ark, and they take Marion along with them. And Indy sneaks aboard the U-boat to follow them, and he corners them with a Panzerfaust, threatening to blow it up. And Belloc says, yeah, go ahead, blow it up. But you're not going to, because you want to see it open up just like I do. It goes to show you that Indy's desire to find these important artifacts, he can't really let it go. Then we finally see the Ark of the Covenant open. And up until then, we got numerous warnings from certain characters. Do not open this thing. This thing's not to be messed with. Because when they open it, Indy says to Marion, don't look at it. No matter what happens, don't open your eyes. For someone who knows archaeology very well and the history of Christianity, he probably knows more than likely this is not something that you want to mess with. And if there's any truth to what they're about to see, it's probably best not to mess with it, because that's exactly what happens to Belloc and the Nazis that are watching. These astral spirits come out of the Ark, flying all around the Nazis. And then we get that really eerie shot of that one lady spirit turning into a skeleton and Toad screeching like a little girl. And all the Nazis and Belloc are vaporized in one of the most bloodiest and goriest deaths that I've ever seen. All the while, Marion and Indy are keeping their eyes shut, and Indy keeps saying, don't look, Marion, don't look at it, don't look at it. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the biblical and spiritual themes in here, but from what I can tell, and especially coming from someone who's a believer, Indiana Jones, I think, represents the kind of biblical hero in some ways, where he's interested in the supernatural, but he's not trying to control the power of God necessarily. He's interested in it. He wants to find it for his own glory, but ultimately when he sees its power, he knows it's best to just leave it to the big guy upstairs, basically. Whereas somebody like the Nazis, the main antagonists who want to find that superpowered object, their own ambition is what ends up getting them killed, because they want to try to control the supernatural powers that come from it. By the time the Ark is closed, and Indy and Marion open their eyes, they find out that their ties have been cut loose. I like to think of it as that God basically took his wrath out on the Nazis, but knowing that Indy and Marion weren't interested in trying to control his power, he basically spared their lives. So the Ark is then brought back to the States, and unfortunately, it's confiscated by the United States government, much to Indy's chagrin, but he at least can walk away knowing that the Nazis are not going to get their hands on it. And then we later see, as the movie ends, that it's taken to Area 51, as we later find out in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And then the movie ends. Raiders may not be the most deeply emotional and complex movie in the series, but it's a very straightforward and very simplistic plot with good guys versus bad guys, just like the original Star Wars, showcasing a very capable protagonist who has a really good sense of vulnerability to him, and a really fun set of antagonists who may not be the most memorable, but thanks to the actors, they do leave enough of an impression. And except for maybe a couple times when the movie slows down, everything from the action scenes, the storytelling, the musical score by John Williams, just about everything in Raiders of the Lost Ark works for me. It is one of the best, if not the best, action film in cinema history. Not my personal favorite of the series, but man, every time I watch it, it's hard to put into words just how it makes me feel. Also, I do find it kind of funny that Alfred Molina gets all these spiders all over his back, knowing which movie he later shows up in his career. All in all, I really like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Thank you guys for hearing my thoughts. What are your thoughts on Raiders? Do you love it, like it, think it's alright, or do you hate it? Whatever the case is, comment below and tell me your thoughts, and I'll see you guys in the next video.